Hey everybody, this is Jay with Inspirion Insurance Solutions and Inspirion Trucking Services, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the FMCSA Hours of Service Basic. Our objectives today is to learn about the HOS Basic, the scoring system, and the consequences of a high score, and then to discover some ways to lower the score. So what is the Hours of Service Basic? The HOS Compliance Basic is one of 7 categories the FMCSA uses to determine how a motor carrier stacks up to other carriers with a similar number of safety events. It aims to prevent drivers from operating a CMV if they are ill, fatigued, or not complying with hours of service regulations. Unsafe Driving Intervention Threshold. For each basic, the FMCSA sets what's called an intervention threshold. If a carrier scores at or above the threshold, then interventions like a warning letter to if you don't improve, an on-site inspection can occur. For HOS Compliance Basic, you're looking at 65% for general carriers, 50% for passenger carriers, and 60% for hazmat carriers. A high score can lead to warning letters from the FMCSA, on-site inspections and fines, more frequent roadside inspections, and higher insurance premiums. Maintaining basic scores below the threshold demonstrates to the FMCSA that a fleet is operating safely. What drivers can do to keep basic scores down. Driver behavior has a direct impact on how a fleet ranks in the program, making it important to understand the following. What violations carry more points and have the greatest impact on HOS compliance? How long violations impact a score for, so just one violation can affect standing for up to 2 years, and how warnings can impact basic scores just as much as violations do. Have clean inspections. Clean inspections positively impact a fleet score. This is because violations drop out of the system over time. Remember, every violation you get during an inspection can harm basic scores even if no ticket was issued, so to prevent any issues, ensure you're accurately tracking your hours of service. Learn methods used to log hours of service. If you're unsure about hours of service requirements, don't be afraid to ask a supervisor as a driver, or if you're a supervisor, don't be afraid to ask a compliance specialist. If you're required to use an ELD, be sure you know how it works and that you're using appropriate systems to track your hours. Ensure you know how to use paper logs. If you're required to submit them, request and attend additional training sessions as needed. Don't drive fatigued and plan your stops. Take driver fatigue training seriously. Eat healthy while on the road, avoid medications that cause drowsiness. Be aware that smoking, turning up the radio, and drinking coffee are not real cures for fatigue. Be proactive, plan your stops. This will not only give you opportunities to rest, but it will also help you avoid driving over hours. Report all violations. Reporting basic violations allows us to stay ahead of potential issues and to take action to lower your score. What's more, it can help you identify and appeal erroneous violations using data from company systems like ELDs and GPSs. Understanding applicable hours of service rules. One of the best ways to help maintain a low score is to educate yourself on HOS regulations. The rules can be complex, so it's important to understand what's expected in order to avoid violations and fines. The subsequent slides from the Department of Transportation provide a high-level overview of hours of service regulations. Goals of the regulations is to provide increased opportunity for CMV drivers to obtain necessary rest and restorative sleep. Property carrier restrictions. 11-hour driving limit. Employees may drive no more than 11 hours total during the 14 consecutive hour duty period. Once an employee has driven a total of 11 hours, they cannot drive again until they've taken 10 consecutive hours off duty. The 8-hour rule. Drivers may only operate a commercial motor vehicle if 8 hours or less have passed since the end of their last off-duty or sleeper berth period of at least 30 minutes. 14-hour on-duty limit. Drivers are allowed a period of 14 consecutive hours of on-duty time after being off-duty for 10 or more consecutive hours. The 14 consecutive hour duty begins when any kind of work is begun. Once the end of this 14 consecutive hour period has been reached, employees cannot drive again until they have been off duty for another 10 consecutive hours. 60/70 duty limit. If your company operates vehicles every day, employees are not allowed to drive after being on duty for 70 hours during any 8 consecutive days. Once the 70-hour limit has been reached, employees will not be able to drive again until they have dropped below 70 hours for 8 consecutive days. If your company does not operate vehicles every day, employees are not allowed to drive after being on duty for 60 hours during any 7 consecutive days. Once the 60-hour limit's been reached, employees are not able to drive again until they have dropped below 60 hours for a 7 consecutive day period. 34-hour restart. Regulations allow a driver to restart their 60-70 duty limit by taking 34 consecutive hours off duty. After taking 34 consecutive hours off, drivers begin counting their hours on the day of their restart and do not go back 7 to 8 days normally required. Expectations and exemptions. Oil field operations, groundwater, well drilling operations, construction materials and equipment. These motor carriers have a 24-hour restart exception for 60-70 duty periods, but must comply with other regulations including 14-hour on-duty limitations and 11-hour driving limitations. Now we move to passenger carrier restrictions. 10-hour driving limit. Employees may drive for no more than 10 hours total of their 15-hour duty limit. There is no limit on how many of these hours can be driven at once. Once an employee has driven a total of 10 hours, they cannot drive again until they've taken 8 consecutive hours off duty. 15-hour on-duty limit. Drivers are allowed a period of 15 hours on-duty time after being off duty for 8 or more consecutive hours. The 15-hour limit does not include time spent off duty throughout the day, such as breaks. Once this 15-hour limit has been reached, employees cannot drive again until they have been off duty for another 8 consecutive hours. Passenger carrier restrictions. 60-70 duty limit. If your company operates vehicles every day, employees are not allowed to drive after they've been on duty for 60 hours during any 7 consecutive days. Once the 60-hour limit's been reached, employees are not able to drive again until they've dropped below 60 hours for a 7 consecutive day period. If your company does not operate vehicles every day, then employees are not allowed to drive after they've been on duty for 70 hours during any 8 consecutive days. Once the 70-hour limit has been reached, employees will not be able to drive again until they've dropped below 70 hours for an 8 consecutive day period. What is classified as on-duty time? All time at a facility of a motor carrier or customer unless relieved from duty by the motor carrier. All time inspecting or servicing a vehicle, including fueling and washing it. All drive time. All time in a commercial motor vehicle unless resting in a sleeper berth or when the CMV is parked. All time loading, unloading, supervising, or attending to a truck or motor coach, bus, or handling paperwork. All time taking care of a broken down vehicle. All time spent doing any other work for a motor carrier, including giving or receiving training and driving a company car. All time spent doing paid work for anyone who is not a motor carrier. The first 2 hours spent in a passenger seat before or after 8 consecutive hours spent in a sleeper berth are not included as on-duty time. Sleeper berth provision. Property carrying CMV drivers. Drivers using the sleeper berth provision must take at least 8 consecutive hours in the sleeper berth plus 2 consecutive hours either in the sleeper berth, off duty, or any combination of the two. For passenger carrying CMV drivers using the sleeper berth provision, they must take at least 8 hours in the sleeper berth and may split the sleeper berth time into 2 periods, provided neither is less than 2 hours. The first 2 hours spent in the passenger seat before or after 8 consecutive hours spent in the sleeper berth are not included as on-duty time. Record-keeping requirements. Drivers of both passenger and property CMVs must keep a 24-hour log of how they spent their time each day. After it's completed, drivers have 13 days to get the original copy to the carrier. The carrier may require drivers to turn it in sooner, but drivers must keep a copy of the log for the next 7 consecutive days. The copies must be available for inspection by law enforcement officers. Anytime a driver works for more than one motor carrier during a 24-hour period, they must make extra copies and give each copy of the log to each motor carrier, and the log must include all duty time for the entire 24-hour period, the name of each motor carrier worked for during the 24-hour period, and the beginning and finishing time including AM or PM worked for each motor carrier. So, a summary of key points. The FMCSA uses the CSA program to score motor carriers on a safety category called Basic, and this helps identify potentially dangerous employers. Driver behavior has a direct impact on these scores, and it's important to avoid violations at all costs. And you can help maintain a low score by following the rules of the road, and with time violations will drop out of the system. This has been Jay with Inspirion Insurance Solutions and Inspirion Trucking Services. For more information on hours of service regulation or general compliance, or for insurance needs, feel free to give us a call at 844-558-7825. Thank you.